Hello YouTube, welcome to my video. Today's video is titled Study and Practice. Study and practice both in quote marks, because I want to talk about the common popular notion of these words, study and practice both. And then if we go a little bit back and look at the history, the etymology of these words, what do they actually mean? And then I would like to give some practical things, practical relating to practice. We'll get more into that, about how updating or restoring a correct understanding of these terms could help everybody in their day-to-day lives. So I'm making this video also too to help encourage and motivate me to do better at stuff every day. So hopefully you will enjoy it too. So let's see. I started my document here with a quote that I made up. What do you people even do all day? So for somebody, a non-modern person, day-to-day life for many people, let's use a hypothetical peasant farmer person, was filled with lots of self-evident demands. So for example, somebody might have to say milk the cows or feed the chickens, or go outside, go deliver some item. So the necessities of daily life in the pre-industrialized world would naturally present lots of things for people to do. And then, if let's say you have some land, things start going well, then you might say, well, it'd be nice to have some oxen to help me plow this field instead of doing it myself or whatever. And then naturally people would be able to see a natural progression of how could I go from this little small life that I have, and how could I work or buy things or deal with people and so on and so forth in order to expand and create more abundance, basically. Now, if we look at a lot of modern people, well, let's write some words. Many people live in a kind of post-scarcity type living situation. By post-scarcity, meaning anything for daily life that you might actually need in terms of material stuff. For the most part, like most people could get these things. So, for example, the whole idea of like some bored suburb kids deciding, oh, should we eat at Chick-fil-A or Chipotle for lunch? Or should we just wait till we get home and, see what's at home? Or maybe we could all order a Costco pizza together. Okay, these are all post-scarcity thoughts. No one's thinking about how they're starving. More so, it's like deciding between various pleasures. And probably if everybody just skipped eating for the day, like no one would fall dead. So the idea of post-scarcity, maybe to another popular jargon, would be first, quote-unquote, first world problems, which I think is appropriate, but sometimes it's used in a kind of snarky, unhelpful way. So maybe we'll return to that later. Right. Okay, so I was motivated to do this video because I spent a lot of time studying and practicing various things. I think in general, you talk to people, if it's like, oh, a kid often studies or practices things, this is generally seen with a positive connotation, like, wow, well, we could make like an Asian joke. Oh, why go on Facebook? Why not Facebook and study? Ha 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 ha. Or just like practice violin or whatever. So there's this idea that there's some inherent virtue in study of practice of various sorts. And I think the obvious reason for that is because if there's people that are high achieving in whatever domain that we want to talk about, if there's any kind of virtue or refinement in that domain, there's going to have to be some kind of study or practice involved. So I want to look at each of these concepts separately, words separately, because while oftentimes I think they do go together, they do pick out some distinct things. So let's look first at study. So I went on Wiktionary, my favorite source for just looking at the etymology of words, or including older definitions. And the definition that came up was to focus the mind upon some subject. So I think in the modern sense, like, I don't think anybody would disagree with this general sense, but what exactly study means, I think that this is not widely understood, like how you put it into practice. How does someone actually study something? So, for instance, people might say, oh, I have to study for such and such standardized exam. And then people might discuss various study methods. So what might those be? Someone might say, like, I buy a preparatory book. Another person might say, like, oh, I make my own flashcards based on, like, let's say for memorizing vocabulary. I, like, look through books and I find words I don't know, and I'm writing on a note card. So people might talk, or nowadays, a lot of people are probably like, oh, I just download an app. Oh, which app? And it's like, there's these two apps. I like this app better. So there might be any number of ways in which people might talk about studying, but what exactly that means, it's often a kind of hazy, amorphous thing. But generally, I think that this definition of focusing the mind upon some subject is appropriate, and even now, like I found this a palatable, acceptable definition. I think most other people would. So the methods studying how that works, what that's going to look like, that varies a lot. But the main thing is like, if you did say something like, I'm studying Spanish vocabulary, okay, there's a clear thing that you're focusing on, and insofar as that body of knowledge, that thing, that whatever it is, that object that you are actually can be studied, then you could study it. So let's give some practical examples of what studying looks like. So two examples I brought up here are with music and art. Okay, so with music, one example of a study, so I have this book here. This is like a classical guitar study exercise book. And yeah, usually there will be like a particular topic that's involved. The composer will design these studies with an aim to help develop something. So certain parts of the study might be easier, like, for instance, all this book is in standard music notation. So, there's some prerequisites. It's assumed you already know how to do certain things, but provided you already know how to do those things, then you could focus your attention on something more specific. So, like, okay, study number 23 by Carcassi, Opus 60 number 7, and the editor, compiler of this book has these notes. He says, this often reprinted study sounds very effective while being quite easy to play. The repeated notes serve as an introduction to tremolo technique, and the complete study can be worked up to lively speed provided that careful attention is given to the fingering. Okay, so I just opened to some page, but already here in this little intro, this is a helpful book because it's telling you, like, okay, you don't just play these notes, but while you're playing these notes, using this thing that you are looking at, gives you an opportunity to look at repeated notes, number one, for working on the tremolo technique, as well as fingering. So you can look at how, fingering is important, and repeated notes are important. And if you play through that study, you'll probably realize you'll have some kind of revelation about fingering and repeated notes that you otherwise wouldn't if you're just starting out playing guitar and you have never done these things before. Likewise, we could see with art exercises. So that was a music example. You might do like a still life study. So the teacher might set up some various fruits. Oh, I got an apple here. So it's like you have an apple and, you set it on a piece of paper, and then the shadows fall in a certain way. And then the study is like you're sitting there, you're staring at the apple and the shadows cast on some paper or whatever. And the idea is like normally you wouldn't just be like fixating on an apple, you'd be eating it or something. But for the purpose of study, you're doing that. You're forcing yourself to calm down, look, and observe. Okay, how does the light hit the apple? Where do the shadows fall? Are the shadows dark and equally dark in all the places, or is it darker on one side or the other? Maybe it's just a black and white thing, so you aren't even looking at the color. That might help somebody focus on the value, the light, the shadow, all that stuff that's happening on the apple. So by focusing their mind on like light and shadow, for instance, you might ignore color. Or looking at like the music study I pulled up, the little intro blurb thing I read, it said it was a relatively easy to play study. So if you're playing that study, you're not going to be like worrying about finding notes and noodling around all over the fretboard and stuff, because the focus of the study makes one thing easy so that you could focus your attention on a particular thing and do a better job at that. Okay, so to summarize, study, crucially, it's focusing the mind upon some subject, and oftentimes the way study successfully is carried out is either directly with a teacher who could help and guide you as a human being to another human being, or like the examples I'm giving with the book, it might be more indirect. So I've never met the teacher here, Mr. Frederick Node. I've never met him. You could probably find him on YouTube. But I have his book and I have his helpful words here, and I'm sure he's helped many students learn guitar. So if I study and I play from his book and I pay attention to what he's telling me to pay attention to, it's like having a teacher, and many people go very far in lots of things doing that. But the teacher is needed there to help me just focus. If I just pick up a guitar and I say, I'm going to study guitar, well, what exactly am I going to study? It's a big, like, stupid wood box with wires attached to it. Like, how do I know what to what are the things that make guitar sound good? So I could, and maybe some people are music geniuses. I don't think I am. And they could, start to mess around, make sounds, find out what sounds good. But typically, I think that the way that people learn anything would be observation, attention. So focusing the mind upon a subject. It doesn't have to be a book. It could be you, like, let's say like a kid watches people play tennis every day, and then he notices some players are better than other players, and just by observing, focusing the mind upon some subject, he's able to see like what techniques work and what techniques don't work. And then in his own time, and this will be our transition into practice, through practice, so first he studies to see what sort of patterns he wants to do, what sort of things he wants to emulate. And then through practice, he's able to actually acquire those abilities for himself. But this hypothetical kid learning tennis is only able to do that through putting in that study, that observation, the focusing of mind and attention. And then through doing that, is able to actually do stuff. Okay, so the next word we have here is practice. So I only have one little blurb here. I mean, generally, you could just say practice is like actually doing stuff. I wanna bring up the book that is usually called Acts in English, Acts of the Apostles or Acts. The Greek word for that is you say it like Praxis. So here I have a Greek New Testament, and I'm holding the word Praxis, Praxis, up to the camera, and you could fact check me yourself and verify that is so. But in the Book of Acts, what is it? Some people regard the Book of Acts as something like the first lives of the saints. For any of you who have looked into the Orthodox Church at all, the lives of saints or hagiography is recording like the deeds, the actions. How do the saints live? What are their actions? It's not about what is every thought of all the saints and what are their favorite flavors of ice cream. That is not the acts of a person, right? It would be like this person fasted in this way or prayed in this way or healed these people or went to this and that place. Just go look up some examples yourself. Crucially, though, practice is doing stuff. Right. So, let's talk briefly about modern ideas of practice and study and how this does or doesn't work. Okay, so infamously, students might go to the library and then they'll just say they're like, I'm going to study all day. And then the stereotype is they do hardly any studying by the end of the day. Maybe they organize, they make their desk neat, they do some breathing exercises. The friend stops by, they say hi. Oh, it's 10:30. Oh, we could have early lunch. And then, okay, I open the book. I'm really going to study. And then let's say they read a paragraph. Okay, that would be like one act of the beginning of an act of study, because maybe to actually take the time to sit down and read a paragraph, you actually have to focus your mind on some subject at least a little bit, enough to see the words. But anybody who is well practiced in reading, including silent reading, will know that simply mechanically saying the words of something is very different than actually understanding, or you could say meditating upon the subject. Like, there's probably many people out here who could read multiple foreign languages. For instance, like I brought up my Greek New Testament right here. I'm doing some study of the Greek language, but my Greek is by no means good enough that I could like read the text and like understand all the sounds that are coming out of my mouth. Though the way they pronounce the alphabet and stuff, at least in the modern system, is easy and well established enough that I could succeed in reading it, and I could even silently read it. But that's very different from focusing my mind upon not just the words and the forms of the words themselves, but the meanings behind the words. So, right, successful study must involve focusing the mind upon some subject. But what often happens in practice, and the struggle of many like modern, say, university students to successfully study comes from, among other things, failing to know themselves, their own inclinations and habits, and therefore actually spending very little time doing the actual focusing the mind upon some subjects. I'll just bring up two ways, and this might fail. Let's see, 2 ways this could fail for study. The first one will be no clear object or subject of study, and the second will be too much or too little. So let me just elaborate on these really quick. Okay, so if you have no clear object of study, how could you focus your mind upon the thing that you're concerned with? So oftentimes, like, if there's something very big and broad, let's say like biology, you need to actually have something concrete to study, like let's say a frog to dissect, or a paper to go over and see like their methods and what you think about the methods of that paper. But if I just say to you, I'm studying biology, what exactly does that mean? What am I focusing my mind on? How is that even supposed to work? Furthermore, how am I able to make any progress? Like, am I getting better at focusing my mind? Well, if you aren't even focusing your mind on anything, then maybe that's not actually studying. Maybe that's like talking with your friends and making new connections or something. Which, not to say that that's like not a good thing to do, a bad thing to do, like rest, recreation. It's good stuff, but that's different from studying like this art or music, these relatively clear examples I gave. So one way studying fails is there's no clear object of study. So a solution many students use to focus themselves and to make sure they are like their study has purpose would be obviously if there's exams and stuff, if you make like some study guide or thing, basically this is just focusing your studies such that you could succeed and do well at whatever test or examination that you're being given. For something more hazy, like let's say studying foreign languages, so this is something I like to do, but also that I've tried and failed many times at doing. And one of the reasons is because if I'm just like, I'm going to study, let's say, Spanish, what exactly does that mean? If I just plop a Spanish dictionary on my desk, that's not going to do much good. However, if I have a clearly well-defined task in front of me, then suddenly that could be something more useful. So, like for instance, now I have like a text in Spanish that I could read. So if I'm reading this text, it won't be long before I come across a word I don't understand, or even like a grammatical structure that's confusing to me. And so when I know precisely what I don't know, then I could focus my attention upon that subject. Like, okay, I don't know what this word is. But if I focus my attention upon that word, then I could learn what it means. But I can't study unless I have something to focus my attention on, find out where I don't know, and then fill in that knowledge gap. So having a clear object of study, oftentimes that happens through like a teacher or a book or some sort of materials that directs and guides you. I think this is one area where like the apps, like for instance with languages, the popular one, Duolingo, stuff like that, these are able to help people get progress in what they're doing, in that even, let's just say they're kind of boring or repetitive or there's annoying aspects about them. One thing they will do is they will focus people to play a kind of game where they have to focus their attention and say, oh, I know that or I don't know that. Whereas if you try to do that without like a computer, like old school style, it could be a more complex thing, and you might need somebody to help teach you how to do it for the first time. Like, I don't take it as a given that anybody would just know how to like open up a paper dictionary and interpret the entries in the paper dictionary, for instance. Okay. And then the second reason I just wrote here of how people fail to study is too much or too little stuff to hold attention. So going back to, once again, the example I showed with like the guitar book, then the two examples were repeated notes and like fingering. So maybe like you could focus and think about these two things and kind of keep track of everything. But if it was like, this study focuses on repeated notes, fingering, correct intonation, this and that bass pattern, this and that, then at some point that's too much. It's not focusing just on something that you could actually study and focus on. You can't just say like, why don't you just apprehend this whole apple at once? Like, we could say, okay, for this study, we're going to focus on looking on the color patterns of an apple and, talking about apple ripeness based on that. All right, that's very doable. But if we're just like, let's apprehend the whole essence of an apple or something, that's just not something that we could do. It's too much. Right. So I think oftentimes, more often than not, that too much side is the problem that people face when studying. Oftentimes, too, if there's something that's new to someone and they're very excited about it, it would be like attempting to do like a masterful painting when you just kind of started painting. If you're trying to do all these things and focus on all of these things at once, there's a high chance you won't do a good job at anything. But if you do like one piece and it's like, okay, I'm only going to focus on doing like a good sketch first, and then after I'm going to focus on this, and so on and so forth, then you'll be able to actually focus your mind upon some subject or some aspect of what you're doing to improve. Okay, and then the other thing here I wrote is too little. Okay, so if you don't give somebody anything really to focus upon, they'll get bored basically, and their mind will wander. They'll focus about other stuff. Like as an exercise, if I was just like, all right, let's just think about 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, then you could be like, we could be like 1, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, then what? Like, then, you'll probably start thinking about, like, your dinner, or, did I feed the dog? Wonder what they're saying on YouTube. Whatever, because there's too little to focus on. Whereas on the other hand, like I was giving an example of like reading a book to study a foreign language. Well, there's always something next. So if you finish understanding one sentence, then you go on, then there's the next sentence, and you could continue and repeat this process until, let's say, you're making yourself study for 30 minutes, some set time frame. Then by that time's over, you're tired, or like maybe you're just saying, I'm just going to study until I want to go to sleep. Well, then your body will tell you when you're tired. Cool. So those are two ways in which study could fail generally. It's like broad ways. And then also talking about, briefly I discussed some ways in which people try to quote unquote study and things don't go so well. So clearly the solutions, two ways to fail. How do you correct it? Well, number one, have a clear object or subject of your studying. So if you're saying you're going to study, you are going to study, you should be able to articulate very clearly what it is that you're studying. Like, I'm memorizing the names of all the bones in the hand so I can pass my anatomy test, whatever it is. And then don't have too much or too little to study. Don't say, I'm going to memorize this whole dictionary today, because it's not going to work. But if you're like, I'm going to learn 3 words in Spanish every day, maybe that's like a great start. That's a great place that if you consistently do that, before you know it, you'll be very good at what you're doing. So studying requires knowledge of yourself, what's too much or what's too little. You got to track your progress a little bit in a way, and have tasks that encourage you to extend what you're doing, to do better, not just to give up and say I'm good enough, unless that's what you want to do. Like, I only care about cooking an egg so well. I'm not going to sit around studying an egg too much, because studying an egg might be like this 1+1=2 example. It might just be like too little, too uninteresting to hold your attention. You got other stuff to do. Okay, well, great. You don't need to study something that you already know about if you got other stuff to do. You could, go do your other stuff. So we got other stuff to do. Let's talk about practice. So practice, crucially, it's about doing stuff, and I think there's some crossover with study here. Let's also add in some quotes. So you might have heard this quote that practice makes perfect, and then some clever people, whoever, anonymous, sort of corrected this statement to say it's not that practice makes perfect, it's that practice makes, can you guess? Permanent. So this is to say what you do and you continually do, what becomes habitual, then that becomes permanent. So people will say, like, I'm playing violin. Well, I should learn how to play violin properly, because if I'm not playing violin properly, like, let's say I'm playing in a way that could get me injured, then what happens is I get used to playing in a way that's actually self-destructive, and the more I'm practicing, I'm kind of locking in that habit such that it would be harder to change. Then a violin teacher might say it would actually have been easier if you were a totally new person, or you learn how to play left-handed or something, than if I were to try to undo or work around, these bad habits that you have already formed. This word here, perfect, this is also interesting. Another sense of the word perfect is completed, fulfilled. So, okay, I'll make this relevant. So another thing about practice and actually doing stuff is, like, you actually have to do the thing that you're doing. So, like, let's say you want to learn how to shoot free throws with basketball. Okay, you actually have to shoot free throws. Like, if you just do other basketball shots, right, then you're practicing, you're doing all these other shots, which could help you. Like, you could build up things to help you do your free throw, or maybe you're doing like one arm extension exercise that's like a part of it. Like, you go in the weight room and you do some exercise to strengthen certain muscles. But trying to pick apart and decompose some activity, at the end of the day, if you don't actually do the thing that you're setting out to do, then it's your efforts are fruitless. You don't have a result. You don't have anything to show for what you do. So, like, as an example, I think I've made this mistake a lot, which would be, let's say, for instance, we'll use foreign language. Okay, you could learn a whole lot about. Let's all use Chinese as an example. So, like, you learn how to write some characters, you learn how to understand some audio, and you actually memorize a whole bunch of words. So these are all aspects of study that you're doing. You're studying this object, this huge thing called the Chinese language. And you could practice these isolated aspects of it. But if at the end of the day, your goal with your practice is to actually, let's say, have conversations in Chinese, or meet Chinese people and speak in Chinese, but you only do all these other opposite things, well, your Chinese practice has not been made perfect because you have all these isolated elements. You analyze Chinese, but if you aren't practicing and actually using it, you will fail to. Your labor will be fruitless because you're unable to actually do the thing that the tool is made for. So the Chinese language is like a useful tool in order to communicate with Chinese people. But if you don't do a very good job at the communicating with Chinese people, tool with a Chinese language tool, it's well, your motivation will probably tank after a while. But like, let me give you an example. So like, if your actual goal, the actual practice you wanted to do is say like, I want to meet friends from around the world. Okay, there's a lot of people that do that. Let's say in only English. Okay, so somebody could succeed at the practice, the actual action of doing a thing, which is going out and meeting new people, introducing themselves to new people, and they didn't even have to use like the Chinese language. So someone might like make friends with all the Chinese students because they play the same video games, and then the nerd like Alan, he spent all this time studying Chinese, and maybe he talks with them a little bit, but doesn't make friends in the same way of the person who didn't study the Chinese language at all. Okay, maybe semi-true story there. So the practice aspect of, I guess, of life is like, yeah, because like the praxis of the apostle, the acts of the apostles, it's like actually doing stuff. Okay, so in modern society though, what we often have is maybe practice in the modern sense might often more closely correspond with the notion of rehearsing or trial runs, etc. So, for instance, you probably heard of like basketball practice. Okay, so in basketball practice, the team might run through certain formations to say, okay, we're gonna do this in a game. The coach will hold up his hand to indicate play number 1, or he'll say a word like, let's call this play Pepe the Frog, and he says Pepe the Frog, and then everybody runs in a certain way. So during basketball, quote unquote, practice, then people might rehearse these moves to do. Or like, there was an event 201 before the planned global health event, in which people rehearsed a hypothetical scenario in which a certain thing might start spreading, and all the news people and stuff had their things, their lines they would say, the way they would try to get people to feel, and so on and so forth. So in a modern sense, right, practice, interestingly, often means like doing a fake version of something. Another example of this would be learn to code. People might do coding exercises to practice coding. So like, what is actually happening when you're quote unquote practicing coding? It's just like you're doing arbitrary number shuffling things and trying to make like a hypothetical fake system more efficient, but you're not actually like doing anything. Like you're just playing a really like not extremely exciting game. So in the modern time, like oftentimes practice with this sort of rehearsal sense, I think it it's no surprise that when people think of practice and study, it's like, oh, that sounds like burdensome. like a lot of work in a bad way, or like for instance like this learn to code, this coding exercise example I'm giving. This is like unpaid labor. So like let me contrast that with saying like even if you're like flipping hamburger patties at McDonald's, okay, you're practicing in the sense that you're doing something and your movements are becoming more refined, and pretty soon you could flip patties on autopilot without even thinking about it. Your body's just moving, but by doing that practice, by choosing to do those actions, it isn't like trial runs. Like you're actually doing something, and then you could say, oh, it's not much or whatever. But to be honest, these days maybe flipping patties at McDonald's is better better paid than a lot of other things. Anyways, doing something like that, in modern parlance, it wouldn't be regarded as like practice necessarily, because it's not practice in this rehearsing or trial run type of sense, but in the original sense of just like doing something, doing actions of which you could refine, improve upon, whatever, then indeed flipping patties at McDonald's is a practice. So if people say like what do you do, you could say like I work at McDonald's as a line chef, as a cook. This is what I do. And it's like, cool. And what happens? Well, practice makes perfect. I clock out at 5 p.m. every day, and I collect my paycheck, and they even let me take some, McDonald's stuff home. So I give my friends free McDonald's, and they like me. It's like, that's cool. So actual practice is like actual doing stuff. But the kind of inverted meaning of it is like only this rehearsed trial thing, which in a sense is like kind of ironic because it's like actually not practicing. Like I'll just kind of give like a Christian comment on this. Like if you're gonna say like pray or attend a church service, do you practice praying and practice attending church services in the rehearsing or trial sense? Like, not really. You kind of attend it or you don't. And by repeating your action, doing your action, you might get, let's say you could get, like, refine your movement so you could stand, more still, or, correctly follow forms and, anticipate things and, participate more fully by virtue of understanding and knowing better. But even if you're just totally new to it, it's not like a rehearsal or a trial. It's participatory. You actually practice. You actually do stuff. Whereas one of the, I would say, kind of maddening, torturing things of the real world is that the notion of practice oftentimes is really never actually doing stuff for real. You could even like say, like, well, the coding example here works. It's like, do you ever get to write code for realsies for a company and get paid to write code? Or are you stuck like quote unquote practicing forever? And I think after a while, just doing practice, but not ever perfecting in the sense of completing or doing things. This is a way in which people become very despondent and worn out, because it's like they're just doing these actions again and again, but what is the result of it? Why is it that they're doing it? Furthermore, if they don't enjoy doing it very much, then when could they stop doing it and start doing something else? On the other hand, right, we talked about practice. I think that real practice of something, right, is like, if somebody asks, what do you people even do all day? If you could actually answer that question clearly, then you might be able to enumerate your practices. So, for instance, if someone says like, oh yeah, so, I wake up and, maybe I do a workout, and they complete the workout. Let's say I go running, I go jogging. Okay, so you could say you're a practicing runner. You actually practice and do running, and there's a way, there's a fixed beginning and end point of how that works, and you could show results from that, right? And then they say, then I go to my day job, beginning point, end point, and I watch a couple different shows. So even if it's like maybe a kind of relaxing thing to do, there is a sense in which it's a practice to watch movies or attend theater performances, whatever. These are all practices. And to go full circle, we could even say, and then the person says, and then in order to learn more about computers, then I'm like working through the exercises in this computer programming book. So I'm practicing coding. Maybe another way to say that, a better way would be saying they're studying coding because they're fixing their mind upon some subject, and through doing certain actions, certain practices, by solving these little puzzles, then they're being able to better apprehend the object of their study, which could be how are computer programs written? Something like that. Cool. All right, so we talked about the notions of study and practice in more original senses and in modern definitions. Now let's come full circle and bash on artificial intelligence and quote unquote machine learning and all these things. My little remark here: regard anything that's quote unquote supported by neuroscience with suspicion. Okay, so study, actual study, actually focusing your mind on something. So we could say doing the mental practice of something, and actual practice meaning actually doing stuff. Both of these take work. If you want to practice anything well, it's going to require your time and attention to do it. Nobody does it quote unquote for free, for getting any big result. So after a while, you get good at something. For instance, let's say Alan records YouTube videos every day. Then the practice of recording a YouTube video might become less costly, might become easier for me, but so maybe it wasn't always that way. Or there were certain parts that were easy, certain parts that were more difficult, and it took a lot to go into it. Okay. In any case, a common feature of a lot of the technologies of our day related to study and practice is cultivating a sense of passivity. So as a kind of prime offender example, there's anything that's related to learn XYZ language while you sleep or something. So why would that idea even appeal to someone? Well, the idea is you want to get some power, let's say speak Chinese, but you don't actually want to work. You don't actually want to put in the study, the effort, the focusing your attention to achieve this ability. Furthermore, the sacrifice of your time via practice is not worth it. So it's saying well, do I really have to put in study and practice to something? Can I just get it for free? Then that's the idea of the appeal, which doesn't work, of the learn XYZ language while you sleep. I would say too, a lot of these things, these various approaches of quote unquote gamification, I think they work by the same mechanic. So the idea of that is, instead of having to actively work and focus your mind upon something, instead they're trying to work on the mechanics of basically addiction. So instead of oh yeah, I got to look at this. Nope, I'm going to focus. I'm going to look on this. The idea is that you get hooked, and you're just almost compulsively doing something in order to like learn the little reward badges or whatever. And so you're doing this not by actively, freely choosing to focus your mind on your subject, on some subject, but it's almost like getting you in a kind of like animalistic trance. And what's super scary or dangerous about that sort of this sort of like science that we've unlocked, because it is kind of a science. People could find out what works better and worse for locking people's attention in this way. Is that now it doesn't just have to be something that's inherently interesting to you, such as how do I create, a realistic image by studying how light and stuff falls, like for the drawing example. Now people could say, all right, here is, this subject that I have created. Let's call it, blue people grievance studies. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically make this engaging, addicting approach to just fill people's heads with these ideas, thoughts, sentences, propositions, or whatever on blue people grievance studies. And so by using the game mechanic, this addiction method, you could passively, basically you could say you could program a person. So like with the computer, computer code instructions tells the computer what to do. Then one of the ideas here is, these bad boy behavioral scientist people, they're like saying, how do we program people in the same way? And, if you want to look up some now kind of widely known related big topics to this, there's the letter before N, K, not super but ultra program, as well as what they call neuro-linguistic barogramming, or NLP. And the idea behind this is, and this relates to what the previous video I made about code and language and law and stuff like this, it's saying, how do we basically install our own software on people to coordinate and control their behavior? So a lot of modern approaches to study, learning, education, anything related to these sorts of things is trying to do things automatically. So like people passively, just be passive, just, blend in, just go with the flow. And the idea is that the idea has been cited with people. It's like learn like a child. It's easy. You do these things, and then you could be like installed with whatever thing people might want to give you. Okay, so let me just take a step back with this and just say that, okay, so there is like an element of truth to, let's say, like there are good types of passivity, in the sense that like you might struggle to study something if you put up like certain forms of active resistance. Like I'll give an example with the music. If you're like, all right, I'll learn, guitar from you, but I'm never going to change the way I move my right hand because I learned this 10 years ago, and your new method, like, I don't want to hear any of it. Okay, so like that's just laying out like a very explicit example of someone who might be giving like some active stubbornness resistance to something, and maybe like that wouldn't be like an innocent child who trusts their teacher or their mentor. So there is a sense in which like you shouldn't actively rebel. You should like focus and like trust the program you're doing once you select and decide what you're trying to do. But that's not to say that passivity, like, just like gamify everything and I'll just like lay back and, play games to earn in-game shekels for real life. Like, these are distinct ideas, distinct concepts here. So active, right? Being active. Study is all about actively focusing the mind, choosing what you're looking at and why, and then practice is actually going through and doing the program. And both of these, crucially, they're things that you as a human have to decide and have to do. You cannot automate study and practice. So you could use a new tool such as like an app to help you improve your arithmetic skills or to review vocabulary in a foreign language. But crucially, we're relying on you to focus your mind on the subject and you to practice and to actually do the thing. Similarly, you could do that all in the low-tech method. You could just whip out flashcards and do the same thing. So in one sense, all the fancy new learning technology, all this use it insofar as it's useful and convenient to have it in the form of the phone. But the secret sauce of attention and you actively choosing to do stuff is essential for the success of what's happening. And there's this kind of dream. Oh, let's refer to the movie The Matrix, where was it Neo? He plugged something in, and then they type some buttons, and then whoa, he learns kung fu, absolutely passively. He didn't have to train or do anything. He just gets this program dump. So that's like a nerd. That's a nerd fantasy that you could just passively get all this stuff by quote unquote hacking your system. But in reality, that's not how stuff works. I'll give one more bit here about okay, so one buzzword you might have heard is big data, or you'll hear lots of stuff about there's more information than ever, stuff along those lines. As far as study and practice goes, it is true that if you practice something more, here it's practice makes permanent, that you will probably be able to do the thing better. I think there's an old Greek saying that goes something along repetition is the mother of memory, something like that, which is to say, if you constantly practice, you read the same prayer every day, then if you're reading with attention, you're focusing your mind, you take some time to study the prayer, and then you practice, you read it every day. Eventually, I think that you will successfully memorize what you're doing. So there is a sense in which, you get lots of input. That's like the kind of bugman computer word. You get a lot of input, then this will be the thing that trains you in order to do what you're doing. However, I think oftentimes, once again, returning to the passivity and the sort of nerd fantasy is okay, I'm just going to listen to the Cambodian language every day for 8 hours a day, and then I'm magically going to learn Cambodian. So usually a person will not explicitly put it like that, but it could even take the form of, say, oh yeah, if I go to school and I major in political science, I'm going to know a lot about politics. So here, with the notes I wrote, that is probably not going to happen. However, if you did put in some work such that repetition, that input could actually do something for you, you could actually grasp something with your attention, then something might come out of it. So I wrote, however, if you learn the 500 most common Cambodian words and study Cambodian grammar to know the structured sentences, then listening 8 hours a day of Cambodian radio might be helpful. The secret sauce is attention. So going back to study and practice, right? Oftentimes, practice just doing stuff. Okay, that's good. You should actually do stuff. One could get caught up in the study phase and study forever and never practice. Likewise, one could jump and like practice and practice, but never study, never sort of understand or try to figure out why they're doing what they're doing and what exactly it is they're doing, that they could successfully do it. And okay, so this artificial intelligence stuff, a lot of it is about, okay, getting rid of you, the person, studying and practicing, and then having a machine that could produce certain results, as if the results was the meaning of what's happening. So like, we'll just give an example. I was talking about like art and music again. I'll talk about music. So with a lot of the machine learning and stuff, people might be amazed, like, wow, like look at all the sounds and stuff this could make. It's making Mozart composing the Beatles or whatever, people might be pogging over. But all that stuff, it's stupid because it gets rid of you doing stuff, the practice, and the study, which complement each other, which is saying like, so is music great because of these like data patterns, or it's like music is something that in a sense people do together, and it doesn't even have to be like playing an instrument. It could even be like just listening to music while taking a walk together or something. And the AI could not replace like you focusing your mind and saying like, oh yeah, I recognize this pattern, this, that, and then saying, oh yeah, and then the rest of the song goes like, and you could, let's say, hum the song or whatever. Like that sort of stuff only comes through study and practice, plus the innate genius of each person, their inborn abilities, which they could cultivate and refine through study and practice. Okay, so let's conclude Alan's State of the Union address. So why STEM is fake and gray. So most of our technologies are designed to take away study and practice, and study and practice actually comprises, what do people even do all day? Well, people, they practice, they study, they eat, they sleep, they do like human stuff, but like study and practice is like a huge part of, basically that's saying when you're not like resting, recreating, reproducing, doing that sort of stuff, like you're studying and practicing in a way, if you're trying to be like a serious person that's actually trying to do stuff and not simply like, I exist to feel good and I exist to, take my time and get everything I could get. If you're not doing that, then you're doing study and practice. However, a lot of our technologies are designed to make study and practice more complicated, more abstract. That's why even, me making a video like this, maybe if we show this to somebody 200 years ago, they'd be like, what are you smoking, dude? But, I know for a fact that there will be a lot of like, there's whole subcultures of people, for instance, computer programming nerds, that will probably like hear this video and be like, wow, I've thought about a whole bunch of those things too. I understand a lot of these things. The whole, anybody who might have visited the self-help section of a bookstore, they would probably understand a lot of the stuff that I am saying here as well. So study and practice. How do we fight back against the big bad establishment? Is it is it passing legislation? Is it quote unquote activism? No, I don't think. Maybe those things have their time and the place, but for most of the people, most of the time, a lot of what we have to do actually starts with study and practice. It starts choosing to actually study stuff, which requires active attention, and then actually practicing what you're doing. So, I'm Orthodox Christian. In Christian land, right, so study and practice, two things you might study would be like studying like the prayers and the hymns of the church, and also studying the scripture. And then what would your practice look like? There's what you call like a prayer rule. So people would regularly pray in a certain way, attending the church services, and just going about doing your normal job, doing activities that are blessed, such as working to support your family or to give to people in need. All these things, like study and practice. It's like you study the law to know what is the right way to go, what is a good thing to do, and then, you're not just justified by having memorized a study guide and like knowing all the big concepts. That doesn't mean anything unless you actually practice. And what does practice mean? Is that like running simulations endlessly? Is it like learning to code and doing coding exercises all day? No, it's quite the contrary. Flipping burgers is more close to practice in that it's actually starting to put what is it? I was about to say the pedal to the metal. I meant more like the pencil to the paper, the shovel to the dirt, whatever it means, like to actually start doing stuff. So, right, nowadays, I think that, especially with YouTube, social medias, whatever, there's a lot of pessimism and despondency that goes around, or people are saying, like, what is it that we could even do? Things are getting so much worse. One of my favorite dramatic expressions, collapse of Western civilization. But, okay, you don't want to be passive. If you're passive, you're doing exactly what the bad guys want you to do, and part of the reasons why they're flexing out and putting out all these big fancy tools. So rather than being passive, how is it that you be active? And once again, the answer comes down to what you're going to be doing is a lot of study and practice. Now, what exactly you should study and what exactly you should practice. I think, you ultimately, each of us, we have free will. So that's actually for us to discern, for ourselves and for anybody that's put under you. So, like, I can't tell you, but you probably already know. I probably don't need to, tell you a direction to go in. No one's electing Alan to be internet guru, whatever. I'm not Luke Smith. Oh, never mind. I'll make more Luke Smith remarks later. Whatever. Okay, so I think that about concludes this video. Study and practice. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any comments, suggestions for future things to talk about, whatever, leave them in the comments. We're a small enough channel here that could get back to you and actually address the stuff that you're interested in. So let's enjoy this social media platform called YouTube while we still have the chance, and extract maximum value by studying it, finding where it's useful, and practicing that which we find to be beneficial.